Path of Exile 2 is currently in early access, and so far I've gotten 3 characters most of the way through Act 2, and I wanted to give my first impression from a more casual ARPG player's perspective. The first character I made was a warrior. The bosses and mobs were challenging enough to the extent that a couple times I rage quit and swore the game off, but it was not so hard that it kept me from coming back later and trying again. This made the game feel extremely rewarding, especially when getting past a tougher area or boss fight within the game. Early game is pretty intuitive and focuses on teaching you the general game mechanics, how to upgrade gear, how to unlock skills, and progress through the campaign. The short text dialogue and video clips within the game are extremely helpful, especially when it comes to the gem and ability system. You'll definitely want to make sure to pay attention and read all the in-game instructions on your first playthrough. One thing I really like is that with most of the classes, you get some main abilities early in the game, and you continue to use those abilities for quite a while. This lets you know early on the playstyle of the class and helps you decide if it's something you'll enjoy before getting too invested. I will say PoE 2 is challenging right from the beginning. To progress through the campaign, you need to get some decent gear, choose the right skills, use the right support gems for all those skills, and learn the mob and boss mechanics. Even if you do everything else right, if you make a mistake or don't execute properly, you can still die. If you're new to this type of game or a casual ARPG player like me, I recommend using a build guide for your first playthrough. Also, prepare yourself for the fact that there's a good chance you'll start over with a new character, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Getting good weapons and armor is arguably the most important part of the game. Each new character I create gets exponentially easier, in large part because I've saved some good early level gear in my stash for my early level characters. As you progress through the campaign, you get some good gear drops from bosses and elite mobs as you progress. You can also find some good gear from the vendors as you level. Just keep checking back as you level, and you should find some pretty good loot. Most games I've played, vendor items are a complete waste of time. In PoE 2, you can get some good rare or magic items as you level, and the vendor inventory refreshes frequently, so it's a good idea to keep checking back. There have been a few times I noticed I was starting to struggle. I'd just go back to the vendor, upgrade a couple pieces of gear, and it got a lot easier. I also like the salvage and disenchant systems, and that'll give you some good items so that you can use those to upgrade your gear. You also get a ton of orbs of transmutation and orbs of augmentation throughout the game. These are cheap, easy ways to upgrade your gear early in the game. The skill system's pretty interesting. You get skill gems that unlock your skills. After you unlock the skill, you add it to your skill bar. Then you get support gems that you use those gems to buff those skills. And then you get spirit gems a little bit later on in Act 1, and you get a spirit ability, which is like a passive ability that buffs a certain attack type, which is pretty cool as well. You've also got the passive tree. This is probably the most important part of your build to get right. Although respeccing your passive tree in PoE 2 is infinitely easier than it was in PoE 1. The passive tree, skill gems, gear system are much simpler than they were in PoE 1, but it's still complex enough to keep things interesting. As a casual player, between the skill gems, passive tree, support gems, spirit gems, at first all of this might seem like a lot, but it really does start to click the more you play. And now I'm starting to enjoy the complexity. PoE 2 also does a much better job of explaining these things than PoE 1 did. And it also does a good job of not overwhelming you with everything all at once. Possibly the best part of PoE 2 is the overall gameplay. In PoE 2, even taking down the standard mobs can be interesting. In Act 1, you need to know to stay away from or roll out of AoE mob damage. In areas of Act 2, there are some mobs you need to roll away from that do big single attack damage. Knowing even standard mob mechanics can be important in this game. It just keeps the gameplay very interesting. For the most part, in my opinion, the gameplay mechanics are excellent. It also has a good overall feel and has a good mix of cool looking effects while still allowing you to be able to see what's going on. I also love the bosses so far. They're challenging and each has some unique mechanics. Whenever I beat a boss for the first time, it felt extremely satisfying. Even rare mobs were a challenge and felt good to take down. One thing I did notice is there seems to be a big drop off in the effectiveness between the top character classes and the bottom ones. As an example, the warrior was fun to play, but it felt a bit slow and didn't seem to play as smoothly as some of the other characters. Like the sorceress was much faster and just seemed to melt down the mobs and the bosses and were just smooth and a lot easier. The character balance is the one area I think probably needs the most improvement, but we are still in early access, and based on everything I've seen so far, I think they'll get it worked out before the final release. I won't get too into it, but I really like the Ascendancy system and Trial of Sekhmet so far. Once you get about halfway through Act 2, you're able to do the Trial of Sekhmet. In the trials, you have to get through, I believe, 6 different rooms of trials without dying or losing your honor. You lose honor anytime you get hit, so this is pretty difficult to accomplish, but it's not impossible. For me, the first time, most of the trials weren't too hard, but one I just couldn't get past. In the trial, you had to find and activate all of the shards before time ran out. I almost rage quit, but eventually got past it by avoiding that trial completely. The final boss of the trial took some time to take down, but wasn't too tough at all. Once you take down the boss, you get some cool loot and rewards, and then you get to choose your ascendancy. So far, I have no issues with the ascendancy system, and it seems like a fun milestone to go through with each of your characters. For me, it's this point in the game where you'll have a really good idea if this is the right character type for you. My overall impression so far of PoE 2 is it's fun, it's very polished for an early access game, and it's difficult. But it's not so hard that a casual ARPG player won't have a lot of fun. The gameplay is also a bit slower paced and a bit more difficult than any other ARPG I've played, but not in a bad way. In my opinion, this makes for a fun, extremely rewarding gameplay. There are a few minor things that I'd like to see changed before full release. There is a part of the game in Act 1 where you get your first spirit item, and it wouldn't let me pick it up unless I was in a specific spot. There was also nothing in the game that indicated how important this item was. I would also like to see a better balance between different classes, as well as between different specs within the class. If you want to progress through certain content, it seems like you have to have a specific class or build within a class to get through it. This made it feel a bit limited on how you can play the game. As an example, if I choose to play a melee warrior, it sucks to feel like I'm at a big disadvantage compared to other classes or other builds that just kind of smash through the content. Also, a couple things that might get more casual players into the game. One is a default loot filter. You can select that filters out anything that's not a rare item, anything that doesn't have a socket, or anything that doesn't have improved quality, or that also filters out magic items that are not good for your specific class. Also, possibly a way to select your desired class and ascendancy from the beginning of the game, and have the game highlight a basic passive tree and gems that work pretty well with that build, and highlight any magic or rare gear that drops for that class. Those are just some minor things that might help out. But I really do like the game so far, and I think PoE has a ton of potential. It's much more accessible to casual players than PoE 1, and more complex and interesting than most of the other ARPGs I've played. Overall, this has the potential to be a great game for both casual and serious ARPG players for quite a while, and I can definitely see myself coming back to it after each update over the next few years.